For the last 2 days, we've learned a lot about biosimilars, about how they're approved and how they're used can affect patients. You've heard lessons from some of the most experienced patient advocates in the world. And now you have a patient advocacy toolkit full of fact sheets, sample positions, and letters to help get you started. In our final panel discussion, we're going to take a look at what you can do with your new knowledge, training, and tools. And we're going to hear from a variety of stakeholders discussing what they think are the most critical issues to engage on now and in the future.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to one of our final sessions, which is called Putting Your Biosimilar Training into Action. Putting what you have learned over the last couple of days into action is really what this is all about, right? So we have brought back two of our esteemed speakers, Anna Hyde from the Arthritis Foundation, and Dr. Madeline Feldman has come back to talk to us about what you can do as patient advocates and attendees of this training program, and what you can do to put your biosimilar training into action in your own community. So we know that every community is different. We know every country is different. Payers are different. Policymakers are different. So we don't have any magic answers, of course, but we feel like a few general policies, a few general considerations could be helpful in talking about how you can be the best advocate and how you can share what you have learned over the last couple of days with others in your organization and the advocates and the members that you serve. So I'll start with our panel asking about, what are some of the critical policy issues right now that attendees could highlight when they share this training program with their own folks? What kind of critical policy issues should they be aware of? Anna, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I'm glad to be here rounding out the meeting with Dr. Feldman in particular. I imagine what the two of us will talk about are very similar because we're both in the same therapeutic area. So maybe I'll just start from the patient perspective, saying that, something that we're increasingly watching for on the policy level is what happens next year in 2023 when Humira goes off patent, and all of a sudden we have the biosimilar space on the self-administered side available to patients. And what does that mean from a policy perspective in terms of the access and affordability and the ability of the patient to realize the promise of biosimilars, which is better access and lower costs. So that can be at the state level, it can be at the federal level here in the United States, in how payers sort of treat biosimilars in their formularies and things like that. This is maybe less policy, but still very much related, is also just the education and communication. And if patients are going to be transitioning to biosimilars, what does that communication look like? And I think every stakeholder in the system has a responsibility to make sure that that's done in a way in which the provider and the patient are given an opportunity to buy into this promise and to know exactly what is happening in their care.
Right. And Dr. Feldman, I know you agree with that, but what other take do you have on what are the big policy issues right now for advocates?
Sure. And, what Anna was talking about is absolutely correct, but, fortunately for the rest of the world, it is not correct for the rest of the world. So if we're looking at sort of a global look at biosimilars, I think one of the things that we need to start with is the sort of not lowering the standards for the approvals. I mean, we're trying to get physicians and patients and everyone to buy into this. And if you somehow lower the standards, it's just going to create more uncertainty. So if we look at something that can be sort of global, making sure that the standards aren't lowered, no cutting corners just to get something quicker. And, certainly there have been some countries that have felt that maybe, they're getting the short shrift. Well, we're going to get the lower quality biosimilars. So I think something across the board would be to maintain the maintain the standards. And maybe something else, in Europe, we've been sort of looking for standardization and naming. And supposedly, everybody sort of uses the brand name, but that's not really happening. Certainly, it's not really happening in Europe. And as we have more and more manufacturers coming into the biosimilars field, it's going to be harder to trace. And particularly if they lower the standards, it's going to be harder to trace if there's any adverse events that happen. So that's something that I know ASBM has been pushing for years now, and really the World Health Organization is where it still is laying. But I think that's going to be very important. One quick comment on what Anna said in terms of we have not really had, and we really haven't had, self-administered biosimilars. Part of the problem is, the reason why we have biosimilars is so we will have supposedly a lower price drug. And unfortunately, to get onto the formularies on the self-administered pharmacy benefits side, a lower price and no market share, which is basically what biosimilars are when they first come to market, puts you way down on the list in terms of getting on the formularies. The formulary is essentially what we'll get paid for. Now, whether it's a commercial insurance or whether it's the government, is it covered under whatever kind of insurance you're living under? So that is the formulary. In the United States, in the commercial area, there's an unfortunate middleman known as a pharmacy benefit manager that basically decides the formularies, and we really almost have what's known as it's sort of a monopoly of three. And so, because if an expensive drug, even if it's a biosimilar, isn't on the formulary, no one's going to take it. So there's a lot of competition to get on the formulary. And normally we think with competition, prices come down. Unfortunately, that's not the case in the United States. In the US, it's almost the highest priced drug because the rebates or the amount of money that the actually manufacturer pays to the middleman is often a percentage of the list price.
Yeah. So Anna, what do you feel about that? Do you feel that the high standards that have led to widespread biosimilar adoption have been a good thing so far? Do you feel it's time to change the standards? As a patient advocate, what's your take on that?
Well, I think, maintaining high standards is incredibly important for just general confidence reasons. And Dr. Feldman and I have had this conversation before where, it's not just whether the standard for approval of the medicine, is high. It's how we as stakeholders in the system talk about the product. And so, oftentimes if you say something like this drug is cheaper, that can connote that it's lesser. And so we all have a responsibility for how we talk about these to sort of convey what that quality standard actually is. So I think that's kind of one important component, going back to that education and communication.
One issue that we talked about are maintaining high standards for approval so that people have confidence in biosimilars, that we're able to say that, yeah, these have been put through rigorous tests and that the regulator in my country has approved this as a safe and effective drug. And the second thing that we've talked about as opportunities that patients have to watch is this naming issue that you mentioned, Dr. Feldman, this whole idea of pharmacovigilance, meaning that once a drug is put out there in the market, in other words, when they're going through clinical trials, maybe a few hundred to a few thousand people took that drug, but maybe once a drug gets to market, 1 million people are taking that drug. And so the data that you can collect from all those people is really valuable, right? And so regulators require manufacturers and marketers of drugs to do this post-data collection to make sure that these drugs are safe and that these drugs are still effective once they're released into the market. And we know that one of the important concepts of that, of keeping manufacturers responsible for the product, is knowing who got what product. Pharmacovigilance, right? Tracing, tracking, naming, all of these issues that we've dealt with over the last 10 years of making sure that we know which patient got exactly which batch of medicine from which facility and where it was manufactured and who manufactured it. And so the WHO came up with this really cool idea, and it's called the biological qualifier, right? The BQ proposal. We've heard about this proposal over the last couple of days. This is an idea, I think, though, that patients can engage in. Do you agree with that? That we can sort of rally the patient community to say, yes, we want people to know exactly whose drug is going into which patient, and we want the systems that are put together in place to make sure that happens to be the best system possible for patients. And so the WHO has said, if we simply put these 4 random digits after the name of each drug, and we use those worldwide, everybody will know exactly which drug that patient got, who made it, where it was made, when it was made, everything just based on the name, right? What do you think about all that, Dr. Feldman?
Well, we have that here in the US, and I think some of the arguments that have been against it, that somehow putting this sort of a stamp on a biosimilar will make physicians less likely to prescribe it. That has not happened. But again, we don't necessarily have choice in the matter here in the United States. But it has not been any type of a mark of less quality. And here it's very important. Certainly when you're writing papers, you're not allowed to use a brand name. So if all you have is the sort of the non-proprietary molecule, you definitely will not be able to compare in studies one from another, and you certainly won't be able to publish it. So it's important that no matter where you live, you understand the policies of your country, whether there is any doctor-patient appeals allowed, whether if it's a non-medical switch where all of a sudden everyone is switched, even if your country is demanding that. I know there are times when certain circumstances can override a non-medical switch or some type of step therapy. So I think it's important, no matter where you live, to learn the policies, and if you're against it, to let your voice be heard.
Absolutely. I think the general tagline that could apply anywhere is that every country, I can't say every, but many countries have some version of a patient advocacy organization or provider organization or other resource that they can go to with information on both how to keep up with the policy landscape, like Dr. Feldman was talking about, but also how to take action and what opportunities there are to take action. So the United States, the Arthritis Foundation, we certainly do that. We try to provide as up-to-date and opportunities and information as we can. I think, sticking with the United States for a second, because that's where I am, we have this continued sort of overarching emphasis on high drug prices and Congress wanting to address high drug prices. The Arthritis Foundation has long said that biosimilars are a lever that can be utilized to help drive down prices, and that should be considered in any congressional proposal. That's where patient advocacy and other organizations can really help you to sort of understand what's going to have the biggest impact for you. There are also sort of policy areas around education and, just making sure that there are ways in which, biosimilars are communicated and that patients have resources about what they are.
One more issue that I want to close out with, and it's something we've talked a lot over the last couple of days about, and it's this whole concept, sort of what we've been talking about with the automatic substitution, but the non-medical switching. And for me, one of my mantras has always been keeping the physician and the patient relevant, making sure that the physician stays involved and maintains control over which drug a patient actually takes. And that has been our mantra in all the work that we've done around the world. And example after example of where physicians want that control over the patient and patients want physicians to make those decisions, not policymakers, not regulators, not the insurance companies, not the payers, not the pharmacy benefit managers or the PBMs. Patients and physicians want patients and physicians to make the decisions about which drug a patient's going to get. But we've also learned over the last couple of days of challenges all around the world to that. Challenges here in the US for formulary design, challenges in Australia where a whole population of stage 4 cancer patients were forced to switch their drugs with practically no notice, and challenges in Canada where we see massive switching planned on a class of patients who are stable on their drugs, but they're about to be switched by the government to save the government money. So, for me, this is a big policy issue that patients can get involved in. But what do you both think about that?
Patients often want to know, what did somebody with my disease state, how did they respond to any given therapy? That peer-to-peer support is really important, because there's a real fear factor with how finicky treatment can be and how difficult it can be for a patient to find a therapy that works for them, and to be able to stay on that really matters. And so how a patient feels about the idea of switching is going to be different if they're biologic naive versus if they've never really found something that they're stable on, they're still going through that journey, versus they have found something they're stable on and they are really desperate to stay stable. And how we tailor our messaging and our communication to that patient is going to be a really important component to this overarching sort of issue.
I agree with Anna. I mean, there's two different ways of looking at biosimilars: naive patients who've never been on a biologic. And I think, I honestly believe that the physicians throughout the US and hopefully throughout the world have enough confidence that if you're going to start on a biosimilar and you've never been on the reference product or any other, and this is brand new, that it's, clinically it's going to be equal, and in terms of efficacy and in terms of safety. So I think that I am hoping that we can put that one to bed, that naive patients can be started. I'm not keen on payers telling us anything, but if it's a naive patient, that's fine. Okay, now the switching issue, and absolutely how it's handled in terms of if this is a fait accompli and absolutely nothing's going to be able to be done about it, I think it needs to be broached to the patient in a way, almost a very positive way, that I don't have any reason to believe that you're not going to do just as well on this drug as on another one. But the problem comes in, and this is not just reference product to biosimilar. I have already had my patients switch from reference to biosimilar, from one biosimilar to a different biosimilar, and I'm waiting next year for them to switch it back to the reference product. Now, that's a little bit harder sell. And unfortunately, in the United States, unlike other countries where, maybe they've picked two and they're going to stick with those two for 5 years, I don't know, every 6 months, the formulary can change. How you believe is extremely important. And whether it's in autoimmune diseases or cancer, if it's taken 18 months to get a person stable with rheumatoid arthritis, or 5 years, it's going to be hard for them to switch. But if you are the patient and you know that it's going to happen, take a positive attitude. It really makes a big difference.
So one question I have is, where can an advocate go to learn more, both about biosimilars in general, but also about what's happening in their country, how they can get involved? And Anna, I know your answer is going to be go to arthritis.org, right? Because that's where you put all your information, and you've been involved in the biosimilar policy arena since the beginning. So I probably answered that for you. If you have anywhere else that people should go, jump in. Dr. Feldman, where would you recommend people go?
Well, there's a couple of places, certainly for rheumatology, the American College of Rheumatology's website. And I would just recommend, it's easier to just look up American College of Rheumatology. And then the Alliance for Safe Biologic Medicines is safebiologics.org. Right. And both of those places, you can get information on biosimilars. And, if you do have a patient advocacy group and you're just a small group, I do recommend going to some of the larger international groups to give you more information.
Yeah, really good, solid advice from both of you, as usual. So we're going to close it out with that. I want to thank you both for not only your time on this panel, but throughout these 2 days. I told everyone we were bringing in the best experts in the world on this biosimilars issue, and we have delivered that, and you two have really helped me keep that promise. So thank you both for your participation, for your expertise, and that's it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you to our speakers for sharing their insights to help you be a successful advocate. If you have any questions or comments, reach out to us at biosimilars@globalcca.org or on social media. Our handle is @globalcrc.